Green Crow Inn, a novel by Derek A. Kamal, read by Kelman Friedman. Chapter 11. Brewing Lessons. The next morning's staff meeting was to the point. "Naergi is still here," sighed Kalka, "but he's paying, so I guess we're stuck with him. Rooms 11 and 25 are leaving today, so they'll need to be tidied up. 24 has asked for tea to be brought to the room this morning." Sumi Kind nodded and smiled. Furrier stared my way, and I stared at the floor, meaning to look as dejected as I felt. As I said, I'm a capital brooder when it comes down to it. The opportunity afforded me a good look at the office, which heretofore I'd not honestly given a second glance. How different is one inn's room from another? And the office wasn't different. It had the same wooden walls and floors as the rest of the building, but Kalka had included some interesting touches, not the least of which was an impressively long broadsword hung on the wall. "We have to use the stores carefully, with winter coming down on us, and that means the freshest stuff goes first," the innkeeper went on. "So today's special, and probably the next few days, is tomato soup with dandelion tart." Furrier made a face. "It's quite good," said Kalka. "It is sounding lovely," said Sumi helpfully. Kalka smiled. Then she cleared her throat. "Finally," she said haltingly, "I'm happy to announce that our Torsen has had a very good and smart thought about the new year. It's going to be very exciting, and I'll let him tell you. Then he's going to see to the horses." Swiftly. My heart leapt in my chest. Surprise. Elation. My very smart thought. "Well," I stood as I began, "what I have proposed is a promotion, let's say, for the winter season and the coming year. First, we shall have a New Year's celebration that will be the envy of the region. We'll bring them in from all over." Sumi perked up at this, raising her eyebrows, while Furrier squinted. Kalka was unreadable. "But what, you may ask, will make this so special? We are brewing our very own Green Crow Wintertide Lager." "You are brewing," corrected the innkeeper. "Yes, right. There will be music and lights, and, most importantly, a festive tree to celebrate the occasion." "Hold, one moment, please." I dashed out of the office, letting loose an "ouch" when I stubbed my toe against the doorframe. Down the stairs I went, unhindered by screaming toe, to my own small room. The brooch rested on the table near the bed, right next to the bottle Blett had given me. Now that I was so accustomed to the plain decor of the room, the shining brooch practically glared at me. I had been staring at the breastpin when I brooded last night, wondering what could be done about it. It turned out room 21 cleared out completely yesterday afternoon when they'd left the tavern, and, with no way to return it, I was stuck with this thing that meant nothing to me. I had no idea what the calligraphy or the gem could be, or who those people were. Even their names, which I'd furtively read off the registry, were alien. Now I was just a thief. Cursing myself, I hid the brooch away in the dresser, grabbed what I came for, and spun back towards Kalka's office. The meeting remained quiet as I returned, maneuvering my new tree through the doorway and holding it up as proof of concept. The morning light shining through the windows behind Kalka created a rather angelic effect. Sumi began applauding sweetly, but soon stopped when she realized the others would not be joining her. "Thank you," I said. "I will arrange everything, and I hope this will be joyous and profitable. That is all." Kalka nodded her appreciation for my brevity and forced a smile. She tossed a small felt bag onto her desk, and it clinked as it landed. "I expect this will cover your expenses," she said. I pocketed the sack happily. There was another moment of pure quiet. "Right," I said. "The stables." My daily chores in the stables had become both ritual and routine. It was a time of contemplation and reflection, of communion with those wondrous creatures in my charge. That morning I thought through every detail I could concerning the party. "We shall need lights, of course," I said to an attentive Mustang. She seemed pleased to listen to anything I had to say, so long as I kept the brush moving against her dull beige coat. "And we have them. I wonder where those lights in the courtyard came from anyway. We shall procure more. The decor is the easy part, I think. Kalka would probably not allow me to rearrange the common room, so adding a few seasonal items should do the trick." The horse snorted. "Yes, it's just the beer. That's the main thing." I paused and put hand to chin thoughtfully. The mustang snorted again. "Right, sorry." I continued my brushing. "I shall need to see Pram as soon as possible. I'm told winter weather is best for brewing lager, but that's about all I know." Within a short while I had completed my duties at the stables. I got to know a black palfrey and a halflinger named Dunstan. I don't believe we're meant to give human names to animals, but Dunstan was a friendly enough beast and seemed grateful for their care. I certainly felt a connection of some kind, and lamented having to leave them, and the warmth of the stable. Rather than cutting through the back door to the inn, I took my time and walked to the front of the beautiful building the long way, around to my right alongside the girdling porch. The stilts, that last line of defense against any flooding during the rainy season, still amazed me, as did the odd combination of stone, thatch, and pale green wood. Rounding the building to the front was the broad turf of healthy grass split by the path leading to the inn from the main road. Trees of all sorts, beech and pine and oak, circled the inn with equal spacing. I had not noticed this design from the start, and only just recently surveyed it to discover that it was, in fact, an immaculate circle of perfectly spaced trees. I exhaled and watched my own breath waft along in the cold air. Through the tree ring one could see the first buildings of Nawari down the road. I found little time to spend in town, the inn being the primary concern, even of the folk of Nawari, but felt a certain anxious excitement at the prospect of joining in the bustle when Pram, no doubt, would accept my plea to learn more of the brewing arts. Standing over the greens and browns and slate roofs of Nawari like some kind of guardian, Tila Hill was just barely visible at the edge of sight. Trees covered it like fur, save for a few obvious pocks made by foresters, the wood-goers, as they sometimes called themselves. The abundance did strike me as odd now that I saw it plainly. Such a wood harvested for generations should be a bit more sparse, shouldn't it? "Torson!" Calca called from the front door. I sighed and walked towards her voice, but instead of soft turf my boot clopped against stone. Directly in front of the inn was one of Neurgi's wards. A voice in my mind was screaming, reminding me that my employer had just asked for my attention, but I wished to take a closer look at the ward for once. So I knelt over the thing. It was a stone of almost pitch-black coloration. Giving it a closer look showed that it was not flat, but rounded convexly, and etched upon it were odd signs in a script I did not know. They were painted purple, or inlaid with purple gems, I could not tell which. I contemplated the ward for a moment and rose to my feet. "No magic," I said to Calca and pointed at it. "Magic's bad for business, even if it is very rare." I nodded and returned my attention to the ward. "Karmichael and Pram will be here later today," said Calca. "What?" "For your brewing lessons." "Ah!" My feet scuffed the grass gently. I had been hoping to go to their farm, or perhaps to Gilly's home brewery. Calca shook her head, looking oddly pleased, and went back inside. If there was benefit to the brewing lessons coming to me, it was an honest exemption from luncheon. For one reason or another, the midday service was quite busy. Even the usually serene innkeeper appeared to be a bit flush. Neurgi was there, lording over the common room from his usual place at the bar. From my place in the kitchen, I could hear him trying to chat with Sumi Kind whenever she passed, but the server was in such a rush that Neurgi only managed a few half-formed sentences at a time. It was quite hilarious. "Should we go outside, then?" asked Pram the farmer. I returned my attention to her. "No, sorry." I lifted my hands and smiled. "You have my undivided attention." The farmer's arms were crossed. She reminded me of Calca, as they were, I guessed, about the same age. Pram looked more weather-beaten, though. I supposed that feature could be credited to her line of work. She was fair of skin as well, unlike Calca's brown complexion, and shorter, but they had the same bearing. It was, perhaps, the poise of people born and raised in a small town with little in the way of luxury. Her son, Karmichael, looked nothing like his mother, except in effect. Either in mimicry of his mother or thanks to the forces of ancestry, he stood next to her with the exact same posture. He was darker than his mother in all ways. Smooth black hair hung to his shoulders, and an extremely thin, extremely long beard hung from his chin. The bottle Blett had given me was, according to Neurgi, some kind of serum guaranteed to help my beard grow more fully. I had some misgivings about the product, but used it anyway, and I wondered if I should share it with Karmichael. "The first step," Pram said, sounding like a tutor, "is the mash. And we must mash with only the cleanest of equipment." Right, said Carmichael, his voice sounding like some force had lowered that of his mother by an octave or two. Here is the mash tun. It looks like a pot, I said, pointing towards the overlarge pot in the central countertop. It is a pot, man, came his frustrated reply. You think we're going to fit a proper brewery in here? Pram scoffed. Then Carmichael scoffed. Then they went back and forth scoffing a few more times. Amateur, muttered Pram. Is there someone else I could talk to? I asked without thinking. We've got some hot water boiling on the stove. Use it to clean the tun, commanded Pram. Please. The next few hours of my lesson went about as well as the first. Pram took excessive pleasure in her tutelage, and even more pleasure in the disbelieving mockery she expressed each time my inexperience showed. It was annoying. I came to believe it was the plain enjoyment of a farmer having the advantage over an educated city type such as myself. Framed that way, the jeering became somewhat tolerable. Now we put the mash in the brew pot. Not like that, she shouted. Carmichael sighed dramatically and showed me how to properly pour the mash into the next pot without so much of the grain but with as much of the other stuff, he was vague on the name, as possible. A few moments later the kitchen smelled of baking bread, and our beer-to-be was boiling merrily. An hour later came the next bit. That will have to do. We shall now keg it and apply the yeast. Pram waved her hand at a small keg in the corner. I looked at the keg, then back to the pot, then towards the keg again. Will this be enough beer? I asked. More simultaneous scoffing. This is the test batch, man, said Carmichael. You think your great lager is going to be done on the first go? Hardly. Besides, we'll add water to it. Right, I replied. That makes more sense. You haven't even asked for my input, you know. I was thinking some juniper berries might be seasonal and offer a bit of... I jabbed the air lightly to show what I meant. Karmichael and Pram each looked at the other in disbelief. At least they didn't scoff. The liquid, apparently called wort, was poured into the keg with minimal scorching to myself. On the table rested a small bowl of liquid. It bubbled and frothed in a curious fashion. I picked it up. This next? I went to pour it into the keg. No! Pram snatched the bowl from me. That's the yeast, Torson. Do you want to kill the yeast in that hot water, Torson? Why'd you do it, Torson? Carmichael shook his head dramatically. I stammered, having never considered the precious life cycle of yeast before. Take it outside, said Carmichael. With a grunt, I lifted the keg and walked through the back door. Either it was especially warm in the inn, or the temperature had dropped since the morning. I set down the keg and shivered. What now? I shouted back inside. Now you wait, cried Pram. So I waited. Time passed. I felt I might freeze to death, though it likely wasn't all that cold. My plain tunic simply was not meant for such climbs. I crossed my arms and stamped my feet, and then I remembered the scoffing. Wait, I said audibly. Karmichael and Pram were at the bar, laughing with Naergi and Sumi in the dead calm after luncheon. Chill light coming through the windows reflected off floating dust to create an ethereal effect that I did not care for. Not when I was the butt of the joke. Yes, it's hard to find good mead like this in any Dorf home, Naergi was saying. He lifted his glass. Sumi here will tell you Kreneldeep is especially out of the way, so I'll wager they never have mead on tap. Sumi blushed. But that's not why you left, is it, child? Naergi smiled, obviously without malice, but Sumi frowned. She seemed uncomfortable at the question. Must I keep the beer company? I blurted out, half for my own sake and half to rescue poor Sumi. I could not abide seeing her in discomfort. She looked at me and my heart lifted a bit. At my intrusion the conversation lapsed, and a grin slowly lifted Pram's cheeks. No, she said, into her mug. Carmichael laughed in his throat. I sighed and rolled my eyes. How much longer? Is it steaming still? Asked Pram. No. Bring it in then. The now cooled beer. Pre-beer? Sort of beer. The keg rested in the middle of the kitchen as we considered it. Nearby was the bowl with the yeast, still bubbling happily, and some round green cones. Pram stared at the beer, sizing it up like an enemy. Go on, then, she said. I looked at her. What? Pitch the yeast and add the hops. I squinted, thinking of a rabbit. "Oh, the hops!" I pointed at the conical plant on the table. Carmichael shook his head in disbelief. My first option was to ask further questions such as, "How do I pitch it? Just toss it in?" This ran the risk of further ridicule. The other option was to go with my instincts and hope for the best. Feeling I could take no more verbal abuse, I proceeded, pouring the yeast carefully into the beer. After breaking up the hops with a gentle pinch, which seemed sensible enough, I dumped them into the beer as well. Both Pram and her son were deep in thought. "Shall I cover it?" I asked. They both remained quiet, like great strategists on the battlefield. "Yes," they said finally. The keg, now sealed, Pram gave her final instructions. "That's lager yeast there, so keep it cool, but not cold. I recommend the mudroom. You can try the porch, or even the stables, but we're coming up on the first freeze of the year. That'll kill the yeast." "Not the yeast?" I gasped, wondering if they'd noticed my sarcasm. "It will," she said. "This is your little pet now. Give it at least a week to ferment, then put it in another, clean keg and let it condition for at least another week." "Is that enough time to brew a larger batch for the party?" I wondered. Pram shrugged. A second later, Carmichael did the same. "Well, we're sure you'll do fine," said the farmer. They suddenly turned to leave. "But," I said, my tutor stopped and sighed, almost at the same time. "Are there, books I might read to learn more about the brewing arts?" Pram laughed. "Art. This is a craft, my lord." That last word was laden with irony. Brewing, cooking, it's all about the finished product, so no books. "What about Gilly?" Carmichael shrugged. "She may have something. You'd have to go and ask her, I suppose. Well, good luck to you." He waved, as did his mother. Then they vacated the kitchen. Their goodbyes and the farewells of Neurgi echoed from the tavern. But I stood alone with my beer staring at it, wondering what it might do next. I heard the faintest popping sound come from the keg and felt fear building in my chest. Was it supposed to do that? The next few minutes were an agony. My posture shifted rapidly, hands on hips, foot tapping, finger to chin, hands in hair, and back again. I had not counted on a simple keg of beer producing fatherly anxieties. In the end, after carefully moving the keg to the cool mudroom, I decided to leave it alone. With one last affectionate look, I parted from my beer, and dashed back in to check on it a moment later. This has been The Green Crow Inn by Derek A. Kamal, read by Calvin Friedman, with music by Michael Elliott. To find out more, including how to purchase your copy of the novel, please visit shorelessskies.com.